I'm Isolde Merrin, 22 years old. Until 3 weeks ago, I believed that love meant trusting the people closest to you completely. Then I discovered my mother had canceled my entire wedding behind my back, and everything I thought I knew about my family shattered like sea glass against the Maine rocks. For 2 years, I poured my heart into planning every detail of what I thought would be the most important day of my life. I hand-lettered invitations, chose wildflowers that would bloom perfectly in August, and spent countless hours with Evran dreaming about our future together. My mother's voice still echoes in my mind. I did this to protect you, Isolde. You'll understand someday. What she didn't know was that I'd been supporting myself through art school for the past year, secretly building a life she knew nothing about. But how could a mother who claimed to love me destroy something so precious? Without even telling me? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of my childhood. Bedroom, casting familiar shadows across walls lined with my artwork from over the years. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the wedding invitation mock-up I designed months ago, delicate watercolor wildflowers framing elegant script that read Isolde and Evran in soft lavender ink. Every curve of every letter had been deliberate, crafted with the kind of care that only comes from believing in something completely. Our house sat perched on the rocky coastline of Millfield, Maine, where the Atlantic stretched endlessly toward horizons that had shaped my childhood dreams. The salt air had a way of making everything feel both eternal and ephemeral, and this morning it carried the scent of wild roses from my mother's carefully tended garden. From my window, I could see the white steeple of St. Bridget's Church where Evran and I were supposed to be married in exactly 23 days. 23 days. I traced the invitation's border with my fingertip, remembering the afternoon I'd spent in the art studio perfecting the design. Professor Chen had complimented my use of negative space, how I'd allowed the watercolors to bleed naturally into the paper's grain. Art should feel inevitable, she'd said, like it couldn't exist any other way. That's exactly how my relationship with Evran had always felt inevitable, natural like the tides that had shaped our coastal town for centuries. Evran Doyle had been my best friend since we were 7 years old, when his family moved into the boathouse on Millfield Point. I still remembered the first time I saw him, standing on the rocky shore with his dark hair whipping in the wind, looking like he belonged to the sea itself. He was shy then, speaking with the faint Irish lilt he'd inherited from his grandfather, and I was the girl who talked enough for both of us. We grew up together in the way that only happens in small towns, skating on the frozen pond behind the church in winter, collecting sea glass and driftwood in summer, sharing secrets under the old lighthouse when the fog rolled in thick enough to hide us from the rest of the world. When he proposed 2 years ago on that same beach where we'd first met, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like a story completing itself. The engagement ring caught the morning light as I twisted it around my finger, a simple band with a small diamond that Evran had saved for months to buy. It wasn't flashy or expensive, but it was perfect because it was ours. He'd been so nervous when he asked, stumbling over words he'd probably rehearsed 100 times, and I'd said yes before he could even finish the question. Planning the wedding had become my passion project over the past 2 years, a creative outlet that combined my artistic sensibilities with the deep joy of imagining our future together. I'd filled 3 notebooks with sketches, fabric samples, and detailed timelines. The ceremony would be intimate, maybe 40 people held in the church where my parents had married, followed by a reception in the community hall overlooking the harbor. I'd chosen August because that's when the wild lupines bloom in brilliant purple spikes along the coastal paths, and I wanted our wedding photos to capture that particular Maine summer magic. The menu would feature local lobster and blueberry cake from Meredith's Bakery, the same place that had made my birthday cakes throughout my childhood. Every detail was chosen not for its expense or impressiveness, but for the way it connected to our story, our place, our people. My mother, Varel, had seemed supportive throughout the planning process, offering suggestions with her characteristic elegant restraint. She was the kind of woman who can make even grocery shopping look like a deliberate art form, always perfectly put together in her understated way. Her dark hair was usually pulled back in a smooth chignon, and she had a habit of touching her collarbone when she was thinking, a gesture I'd unconsciously inherited. "Marriage is a serious commitment, darling," she'd often say when we discussed the wedding plans. "You want to be absolutely certain you're making the right choice." At the time, I'd interpreted this as maternal wisdom, the natural concern of a mother who wanted her daughter to be happy. I never questioned her motives or wondered why she sometimes seemed more focused on potential problems than on celebrating our joy. My father would have loved seeing me get married. He'd passed away from a sudden heart attack when I was 17, leaving a silence in our house that my mother and I had never quite figured out how to fill. Dad had been the counterbalance to Mom's intensity, the one who reminded us not to take ourselves too seriously. He would have walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes and probably would have embarrassed me with his toast at the reception. Without him, the wedding planning sometimes felt incomplete, like a symphony missing its bass line. But Evran's father, Kieran, had quietly offered to walk me down the aisle if I wanted, and the gesture meant more to me than I could express. The Doyles had always been like extended family, filling some of the gaps that grief had carved into our lives. My older brother Ren should have been at the wedding too, but he'd been gone for 5 years now. He'd left Millfield abruptly when he was 17 after a fight with my mother that neither of them would ever explain to me. One day he was there, teaching me how to skip stones and complaining about Mom's rules. And the next day, his room was empty and no one would tell me. Why Mom always got a particular look in her eyes when I asked about Ren distant and pained, like she was seeing something I couldn't. "Some people aren't meant to stay in one place," she'd say, which wasn't really an answer at all. I'd written him letters for years, sending them to the last address we had, but they always came back unopened. The loss of Ren had changed our family dynamic in ways that took me years to understand. Mom became more protective, more involved in every aspect of my life. She'd always been the type of mother who needed to know where I was and who I was with, but after Ren left, her attention became laser-focused on me in a way that sometimes felt suffocating. "I just want to make sure you don't make the same mistakes," she'd say when I complained about her questions or her tendency to offer unsolicited advice. But she never told me what mistakes Ren had made, leaving me to navigate by avoiding dangers. I couldn't see despite the complicated family dynamics. My senior year of college had been magical in many ways. I was finishing my degree in illustration at the Maine College of Art, working on a thesis project that explored the relationship between memory and place through watercolor landscapes of Millfield. Professor Chen had encouraged me to apply for graduate programs, maybe even pursue an MFA. But I'd been more focused on the wedding and starting my life with Evran. Evran worked as a sailing instructor during the summer months and did boat maintenance. In the winter, making enough to live simply but not lavishly. We planned to rent the small apartment above the bookstore on Main Street after the wedding, a cozy space with harbor views and enough room for my art supplies. It wasn't grand, but it was ours, and I could imagine us there making coffee in the morning, reading together in the evening, building the quiet kind of life that felt sustainable and real. The summer before our wedding had been particularly sweet. Evran would finish work at the sailing school and come find me wherever I was painting, usually somewhere along the coastal trail where the light was best. He'd sit quietly while I worked, sometimes reading, sometimes just watching the water, and we'd walk home together as the sun set. Those evenings felt like previews of our married life, comfortable and companionable in the way that only comes from truly knowing someone. "Are you nervous about the wedding?" He'd asked me one evening in July as we sat on the rocks near the lighthouse. "Not about marrying you," I'd answered honestly. "Maybe about all the people watching, but not about the actual marriage part." He'd smiled at that, the kind of smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Good, because I've been practicing my vows, and they're either going to make you cry or make you laugh, but I'm not sure which." Now, sitting in my childhood bedroom with the invitation design in my hands, I wondered if I'd missed something in those conversations. Had there been signs I'd overlooked? Moments when Evran seemed uncertain or distant? I replayed our recent interactions, searching for clues, but everything seemed normal, or at least normal for us. The sound of my mother moving around downstairs interrupted my thoughts. I could hear her in the kitchen, probably preparing her morning tea with the same precise ritual she'd followed for as long as I could remember. The normalcy of it felt strange given what I was about to do. I needed to confirm the final details with our vendors today, the florist, the caterer, the photographer. With 3 weeks left, there were still a dozen small tasks on my list, the kind of last-minute coordination. That makes a wedding actually happen. I'd been looking forward to this phase of the planning, when all the big decisions were made, and I could focus on the beautiful details. Instead, I found myself staring at the invitation design and wondering if any of it would actually happen. The uncertainty felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with no way to see the bottom. The pearl necklace my grandmother had left me lay in its velvet box on my dresser, waiting to be my something old for the wedding. Grandma Rose had worn it to her own wedding in 1952, and my mother had worn it to hers. It was supposed to be my turn next, continuing a tradition that connected me to the women who came before me, but traditions I was beginning to realize could be complicated things. They carried not just love and continuity, but also expectations and obligations that weren't always clear until you were standing right in the middle of them. I set the invitation aside and reached for my phone, scrolling through the messages from friends and extended family who were planning to attend the wedding. My cousin Sarah had texted yesterday about her flight from Boston. Evran's aunt was driving up from New Hampshire. The photographer had confirmed the timeline for the day. Everyone was moving forward with the assumption that August 15th would be the day Evran Doyle and Isolde Merrin became husband and wife in the little white church overlooking Millfield Harbor. Everyone except, possibly, the bride and groom themselves. The thought sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the morning air drifting through my window. I wrapped my robe more tightly around myself and tried to shake the feeling. That something fundamental had shifted without my noticing, like the ground moving beneath my feet in ways too subtle to detect until the earthquake actually hits. The phone call came while I was in Sorrel's office, going over the final timeline for the reception. Sorrel Ainsley had moved to Millfield from New York City 2 years ago after what she described as a spectacular burnout involving 3 weddings in 1 weekend, and the bride who threw her bouquet at my head. She'd opened a small event planning business above the tea shop on Harbor Street, and we connected immediately over our shared perfectionism and love of beautiful details. Your photographer wants to start at 2:30 instead of 3, Sorrel was saying, checking items off. Her meticulously organized list. Something about the light being better earlier in the day. What do you think? I was about to answer when her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned. That's weird. It's the caterer. Hold on 1 second. I watched Sorrel's expression change as she listened to whoever was on the other end. Her eyebrows drew together and she started taking notes with increasing urgency. Wait, what do you mean canceled? She said. When? By whom? My stomach dropped before I even understood why. There was something in Sorrel's tone, a particular quality of professional crisis management that made my skin prickle with alarm. No, that's impossible, Sorrel continued. I have the contract right here. We confirmed everything last week. She was looking at me now with an expression I couldn't quite read, concern mixed with confusion. Can you hold on just a moment? She put the call on mute and turned to face me fully. Isolde, the caterer says your wedding has been canceled. They received a call yesterday afternoon from someone claiming to speak for your family. The words hit me like cold water. That's impossible. I would know if my wedding was canceled. That's what I told them. Sorrel unmuted the phone. I am here with the bride right now and she has no knowledge of any cancellation. There's obviously been some kind of mistake. I could hear the muffled voice on the other end, explaining something that made Sorrel's face grow increasingly grave. They're saying they received a call from Merrin yesterday at 4:30. Sorrel said to me. Your mother allegedly told them the wedding was off and that they should cancel the catering order. They're asking about the cancellation fee. The room felt like it was tilting. My mother wouldn't do that. She wouldn't cancel anything without talking to me first. But even as I said it, a small voice in the back of my mind was whispering that maybe she would. Maybe she had. Sorrel was back on the phone, asking for details. The caterer explained that the caller had seemed upset, claiming there had been a family emergency that made the wedding impossible. They'd been instructed to cancel everything, and had sent a confirmation email to the address on file. What email address? I asked. Sorrel relayed the question and then looked at me with growing alarm. They sent it to your mother's email, the one she used when she called to make changes to the menu last month. I remembered that call. Mom had suggested switching from salmon to lobster, saying it would be more traditional for a Maine wedding. I'd been touched that she was taking such an active interest in the details. I was wondering what else she'd been doing without telling me. I need to call the venue, I said, already reaching for my phone. And the photographer. And the Isolde. Wait. Sorrel covered my hand with hers. Let me make those calls. You need to go home and talk to your mother. But I was already dialing St. Bridget's. Father Vexley answered on the second ring, his warm voice immediately familiar. Isolde, dear, how are you holding up? The question caught me off guard. Holding up? There was a pause. I'm so sorry about the wedding, my child. Your mother explained the situation when she called yesterday. I want you to know that the church will always be available when you're ready to reschedule. The phone felt slippery in my hand. Father Vexley, what exactly did my mother tell you? Another pause, longer this time. Perhaps you should speak with her directly. I don't want to overstep, but she seemed quite certain that postponing was the right decision. I hung up without saying goodbye and immediately called the photographer. Same story. The florist. Same story. The bakery where I'd ordered our cake. Same story, one by one. Every vendor I'd carefully chosen and coordinated with over the past 2 years confirmed that they'd received calls yesterday from Isolde Merrin, canceling everything. Some had been told it was a family emergency. Others had been told that the couple had decided to postpone. A few had been given no explanation at all, just instructions to cancel and send final bills. Sorrel sat quietly while I made the calls, her face growing more sympathetic with each conversation. When I finally set my phone down, she reached across her desk and squeezed my hand. Honey, I'm so sorry. I've never seen anything like this. She canceled my entire wedding. The words came out flat, like I was reading someone else's. Medical diagnosis? Without telling me. How is that even possible? Technically, your name was on all the contracts, but your mother had been designated as the primary contact for several vendors. Remember when you were stressed about coordinating everything while finishing your thesis? You gave her permission to handle some of the communication. I did remember. It had seemed like such a relief at the time, having someone else deal with the endless details while I focused on school. Mom had been so helpful, so organized, so willing to take on the administrative burden of wedding planning. But she can't just cancel everything, I said. Those were legally binding contracts. Actually, most event contracts have pretty standard cancellation clauses. 24 to 48 hours notice for most vendors with varying penalty fees. Your mother was smart about the timing. If she'd waited much longer, the cancellation fees would have been much higher. The practical details felt surreal. My mother hadn't just sabotaged my wedding. She'd done it efficiently, minimizing financial damage while maximizing emotional destruction. I have to go home, I said, standing up too quickly and feeling the blood rush from my head. Do you want me to come with you? Sorrel asked. No, this is something I need to handle alone. The drive from Harbor Street to our house took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another country. Everything looked exactly the same, the familiar curves of Coastal Road, the weathered fence posts, the wild roses blooming along the stone wall that marked our property line. But something fundamental had changed, like The light had shifted in a way that made everything I thought I knew look different. I found my mother in the garden, deadheading roses with her usual methodical precision. She was wearing her gardening clothes, a linen shirt that somehow managed to stay pristine despite the work, and canvas pants that fit her like they'd been tailored. Even doing yard work, Isolde Merrin looked elegant and purposeful. She looked up when she heard my footsteps on the gravel path, and for just a moment, I saw something flash across her face, guilt, maybe, or resignation. But then her expression, smooth into its usual composed calm. "Hello, darling. You're home early." "Mom." My voice came out smaller than I'd intended. "We need to talk." She set down her gardening shears and pulled off her gloves with the same careful attention she gave to everything. "Of course. Shall we go inside? I'll make tea." "No." The word came out sharper than I'd meant it to. "Here, now, I need you to explain why every vendor for my wedding called today to confirm their cancellation orders." Something shifted in her posture, a subtle straightening that made her seem taller and more formidable. "Isolde, I know you're upset." "Upset?" I laughed, and it sounded hysterical even to me. "Mom, you canceled my wedding. You called every single vendor yesterday and told them the wedding was off. Without asking me, without even telling me. I was protecting you." The calm certainty in her voice made my anger spike higher. Protecting me from what? From marrying the man I love. From being happy? From making a terrible mistake. She picked up her gardening tools and started walking toward the house. "This isn't the place for this conversation." "No, this is exactly the place." I stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Right here in the garden where you've been planning your daughter's life, like you plan your flower beds. Tell me what gives you the right to destroy something I've been working on for 2 years." For the first time in my life, I saw my mother look genuinely rattled. Her composure cracked just enough to show something raw underneath fear, maybe, or desperation. "You don't understand what you're getting into, Isolde. Evran isn't. He's not what you think he is." "What does that mean?" "It means that some men will tell you what you want to hear until they get what they want from you. It means that sometimes the people closest to you aren't the people you can trust most." The words hung between us like smoke, spreading and curling until they touched everything. I stared at my mother's face, looking for clues to help me understand what she was really saying. "Are you talking about Evran, or are you talking about Dad?" The question seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She took a step backward, her hand moving to her collarbone in that unconscious gesture I knew so well. "Your father was a good man," she said quietly. But even good men can be weak. When it matters most." I felt like I was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "Mom, what happened? What aren't you telling me?" She looked past me toward the harbor, where the massive sailboats swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. For a moment, I thought she might actually explain. Then she shook her head and walked around me toward the house. "I did what I had to do," she said without turning back. "Someday you'll understand." I stood alone in the garden, surrounded by her perfectly tended roses, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The flowers seemed to mock me with their orderly beauty, their predictable blooms arranged according to some plan I wasn't privy to. My phone buzzed with a text from Evran. "Hey, beautiful. Wanna grab dinner tonight? I finished work early." I stared at the message, trying to figure out what to say. How do you tell someone that your wedding has been canceled by your mother without your knowledge? How do you even begin to explain something you don't understand yourself? Instead of answering, I called him. "Isolde, you sound upset. What's wrong? Can you meet me at the lighthouse? Now?" "Of course. Are you okay?" "No," I said, surprised by my own honesty. "I'm really not okay." Word count, 1,847. The lighthouse had been our refuge since we were children. The place we went when the adult world became too complicated to navigate. It sat on a rocky point about half a mile from my house, officially decommissioned but still maintained by the Historical Society. The key was hidden in the same place it had been for 20 years, behind a loose stone in the foundation. I climbed the spiral stairs to the top, my footsteps echoing in the narrow space. From the observation deck, you could see the entire coastline our house, the church, the harbor where Evran kept his small sailboat. It was a view that usually brought me peace, but today it felt like surveying a battlefield. Evran arrived 15 minutes later, taking the stairs two at a time with the easy athleticism that came from years of sailing. When he reached the top, he was barely breathing hard, but his face was creased with concern. "What's going on?" he asked, crossing to where I stood by the railing. "My mother canceled our wedding." The words hung in the salt air between us. I watched. Evran's face, looking for surprise, shock, anger, any of the emotions I was feeling myself. Instead, I saw something that looked almost like relief. "What do you mean she canceled it?" I explained about the phone calls, the vendors, the systematic dismantling of everything we planned. Evran listened without interrupting, his hands gripping the railing as he stared out at the water. "Why would she do that?" he asked when I finished. "I don't know. She said she was protecting me from making a mistake. She said you weren't what I think you are." I turned to face him fully. "Evran, what does that mean?" He was quiet for a long time, so long that I started to wonder if he was going to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the wind. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Maybe she's not wrong. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Maybe I'm not what you think I am. Maybe this whole thing is a mistake. I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet again, but this time it wasn't metaphorical. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe your mother saw something I couldn't admit to myself." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of something that looked like guilt. "Isolde, I love you. I've loved you since we were kids, but I don't know if I'm ready to be married." "You don't know if you're ready?" "We're supposed to get married in 3 weeks, Evran. We've been playing this for 2 years. I know." And I kept thinking the feeling would go away, that I'd wake up one morning and feel certain about everything. But it hasn't happened. The lighthouse suddenly felt too small, like the walls were closing in. "So you've been lying to me this whole time?" "Not lying, just hoping I'd figure it out before it was too late." "It is too late." Or it would have been if my mother hadn't taken the decision away from both of us. Evran reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Isolde, please. I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did hurt me. You both did." I was crying now, angry tears that blurred my vision and made everything look distorted. "Did you know? Did you know what she was planning?" "No," he said quickly. "I had no idea. But when you told me what happened, part of me felt relieved, and that's when I knew she was right." I stared at him, this man I thought I knew better than anyone, and realized I was looking at a stranger. Or maybe I was finally seeing clearly for the first time. "I need to go," I said, moving toward the stairs. "Isolde, wait. Can we talk about this? Can we figure out what comes next?" "What comes next," I said without turning around, "is that I'm going to go home and try to understand how my entire life fell apart in one afternoon." I didn't go home. Instead, I drove aimlessly along the coastal roads, my car windows down and the salt air whipping through my hair. The familiar landmarks of my childhood blurred past: the old fishing pier, the antique shop where tourists bought overpriced nautical knickknacks, the ice cream stand where Evran and I had shared countless summer afternoons. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. It was like discovering that a painting you'd loved your whole life was actually a forgery. I found myself at Pimlico Point, where the lighthouse stood sentinel over waters that stretched to the horizon. This wasn't our lighthouse. This one was famous, photographed by thousands of tourists every year. But it felt safer somehow, anonymous in its public significance. I sat on the rocks and tried to process what had just happened. My mother had canceled my wedding. My fiancé had admitted he wasn't ready to marry me. 2 years of planning, dreaming, and building a future had evaporated in the space of a few hours. But underneath the shock and hurt, something else was stirring, a feeling I couldn't quite name. It wasn't relief exactly, but it wasn't devastation either. It was more like the sensation of taking off shoes that had been too tight for so long you'd forgotten what comfortable felt like. Had I been having doubts too? Had I been so focused on the wedding itself, the beautiful details, the perfect day, that I'd lost sight of the marriage it was supposed to represent? My phone rang. Mom, I let it go to voicemail, then immediately played the message. Isolde, please come home so we can talk about this properly. I know you're angry, but there are things you don't understand. Things about our family, about Evran's family, that you need to know. Please, darling, come home. I deleted the message and drove back toward Millfield. But instead of going home, I went to Sorrel's apartment above the tea shop, she answered. The door in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair tied up in a messy bun. I was wondering when you'd show up, she said, stepping aside to let me in. You look like hell. Thanks. That's exactly what every girl wants to hear on the day. Her wedding gets canceled and her fiancé admits he doesn't want to marry her. Sorrel's apartment was a study in controlled chaos event planning materials spread across every surface. Mood boards pinned to the walls, samples of fabric and flowers organized in a system that made sense only to her. It was the physical manifestation of someone who made other people's dreams come true for a living. Wine? She asked, already pulling a bottle from her small refrigerator. God, yes. We settled on her couch with 2 large glasses of Sauvignon Blanc, and I told her about my conversation with Evran. Sorrel listened without judgment, occasionally making small sympathetic sounds or topping off my wine. So let me get this straight, she said when I finished. Your mother canceled your wedding to protect you from marrying someone who wasn't sure you wanted to marry you anyway? That's the gist of it. And you're angry about this because... I stared at her. Because she had no right to make that decision. For me, because she destroyed something I'd worked on for 2 years without even telling me. Because both of them lied to me. Okay, yes, all of that is true, but Isolde, honey, can I ask you something? I nodded. How do you feel about not getting married in 3 weeks? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the betrayal, the violation of my autonomy, that I hadn't really examined my feelings about the actual outcome. I don't know, I admitted, confused, hurt, angry. But are you heartbroken about not marrying Evran specifically? Or are you heartbroken about the wedding not happening? I opened my mouth to say, of course I was heartbroken about not marrying Evran, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself thinking about all the conversations we'd had about our future, trying to remember the last time I'd felt excited about being his wife rather than excited about our wedding day. I don't know, I said again, and this time, the admission felt like a small revelation. It's okay not to know, Sorrel said gently. It's okay to be angry about how this happened while also recognizing that maybe it needed to happen somehow. My mother still had no right. Absolutely. What she did was wrong and controlling and probably illegal in some jurisdictions. But that doesn't mean the outcome is wrong. I curled up in the corner of her couch, pulling a throw pillow against my chest. I feel like I don't know anything anymore. Like everything I thought was true turned out to be false. That's a pretty normal feeling when your life implodes. Has your life ever imploded? Sorrel laughed ruefully. Honey, why do you think I moved to Maine? I had what looked like a perfect life in New York, successful business, beautiful apartment. A fiancé who checked all the right boxes. Then I realized I was planning everyone else's dream weddings while sleepwalking through my own life. What happened? I had a panic attack in the middle of a wedding reception at the plaza, just completely lost it. The bride's mother found me hyperventilating in a bathroom stall, and I had to pretend it was food poisoning. She took a sip of wine. That's when I knew I had to change everything. Do you miss it, your old life? I miss the financial security, she said, honestly, and I miss feeling like I had everything figured out. But I don't miss feeling like I was living someone else's idea of what my life should look like. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the harbor through her small windows. The light turned everything golden, the way it did on summer evenings in Maine, and for a moment I felt a kind of peace I hadn't experienced all day. "Can I ask you something else?" Sorrel said, "Sure. When was the last time you made a decision about your life without considering what your mother would think?" The question hit me like a cold slap. I tried to think of examples: choosing my major, deciding where to live after graduation, planning the wedding, and realized that Varel's opinion had been a factor in every single choice. "I don't know," I whispered. "And when was the last time you and Evran talked about what you actually wanted from marriage, not just what you wanted your wedding to look like?" I couldn't answer that one either. "Isolde, I'm going to say something, and I want you to know it comes from love, okay?" I nodded. "I think maybe your mother did you a favor. Not in the way she did it, that was horrible and wrong and manipulative, but in terms of forcing you to stop and really look at what you were walking into." The words stung because they felt true. "So you think I shouldn't marry Evran?" "I think you should figure out what you want, independent of what anyone else wants. For you, I think you should take some time to remember who you are when you're not trying to be the perfect daughter or the perfect fiancée." "I don't even know how to do that." "Start small. What do you want for dinner tonight?" I thought about it seriously, trying to tune out all the voices in my head telling me what I should want. "Thai food," I said finally. "And I want to eat it with my hands and not worry about being polite." Sorrel grinned. "Now we're getting somewhere. I know a place." We ordered takeout from the little Thai restaurant in the next town over and ate it sitting on our floor, using our fingers when we felt like it and talking about everything except weddings and family drama. Sorrel told me about her adventures in New York, the crazy brides she'd worked with, the time she'd had to coordinate a wedding on a yacht during a hurricane. "Event planning teaches you that most problems have solutions," she said, picking up a piece of pad thai with her fingers. "But the problem has to be the right problem. If someone's trying to solve the wrong problem, they're just going to create more problems." "What do you mean?" "I mean that maybe your mother thought she was solving the problem of you making a mistake. But the real problem might be that you've never learned to trust your own judgment." I thought about that as we finished dinner and opened a second bottle of wine. My whole life, I'd been the good daughter, the one who didn't cause trouble like Ren had. I'd chosen a safe major, dated a safe boy, planned a safe wedding. When had I ever taken a real risk or made a choice that might disappoint someone? "I think I need to go away for a while," I said suddenly. "Like a vacation, like a disappearance. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not surrounded by everyone else's expectations." Sorrel studied my face. "Where would you go?" I don't know. Somewhere I've never been. Somewhere no one knows my name or my story." That sounds healthy, actually, and probably necessary. We talked until almost midnight, making increasingly elaborate plans for my theoretical escape from Millfield. By the time I drove home, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying a heavy backpack for miles and had finally been given permission to set it down. The house was dark except for the porch light, and I could see my mother's silhouette in the living room window. She was sitting in her favorite chair, the one that faced the driveway. Waiting for me to come home, I sat in my car for a few minutes, looking at her through the window and trying to decide what I felt. Anger, yes. Hurt, definitely. But also something that might have been gratitude, though I wasn't ready to admit that yet. Tomorrow, I would have to face the aftermath of today's revelations. I would have to have difficult conversations with my mother, with Evran, with all the people who had been expecting to celebrate with us in 3 weeks. I would have to figure out what came next, what my life looked like without the future I've been planning for 2 years. But tonight, I just sat in my car and looked at my childhood home and tried to remember the last time I felt like myself. Inside those walls, I woke up the next morning to the sound of rain against my bedroom windows and the realization that I had nowhere I needed to be. No wedding vendor meetings, no final fittings, no last-minute details to coordinate. For the first time in months, my day was completely empty. The house was quiet. Mom had probably left early for her weekly volunteer shift at the library. We'd managed to avoid each other completely since yesterday's confrontation in the garden, passing like ships in the night as we both tried to figure out what to say next. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my sketchbook, something I hadn't done in weeks. The wedding planning had consumed so much of my creative energy that I barely touched my personal artwork since finishing my thesis. Now I found myself drawing without purpose or plan, letting my hand move across the paper while my mind wandered. The sketch that emerged was of the lighthouse where Evran and I had our conversation yesterday. But in my drawing, the lighthouse was empty, its light extinguished. Surrounded by storm clouds that seemed to be clearing at the edge's dot, my phone buzzed with a text from Evran. "Can we please talk? I feel terrible about how I handled things yesterday." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I need some space right now. I'll call you when I'm ready." As I was finishing my coffee, I heard footsteps on the front porch. Through the kitchen window, I could see a tall figure with dark hair approaching the door, someone I didn't recognize but who looked somehow familiar. The knock was firm but not aggressive. I hesitated for a moment, then went to answer it. The man standing on my porch was about 27, with the kind of weathered hands that came from outdoor work and eyes that were exactly the same shade of green as mine. He was soaked from the rain, his dark hair plastered to his head, and he was holding a small duffel bag like he'd been traveling for a long time. "Isolde?" he said, and his voice was older than I remembered, but unmistakably familiar. "Ren?" My brother stood there dripping on our front porch, looking like a ghost from our family's past. He was taller than when he'd left, broader through the shoulders, with new lines around his eyes and a small scar on his chin that hadn't been there before. But his smile was exactly the same, slightly crooked, with a hint of mischief that had always gotten him into trouble. "Hi, little sister." I launched myself at him without thinking, wrapping my arms around his wet jacket and breathing in the scent of rain and pine and something indefinably wild. He hugged me back just as fiercely, and for a moment we were just two kids again, before everything got complicated. "What are you doing here?" I asked when we finally pulled apart. I heard about the wedding getting canceled. Thought maybe you could use some moral support. "How did you hear about that? We haven't talked in 5 years." Ren's expression grew sheepish. "I may have been keeping tabs on you more than Mom knows. Small towns, word travels." I stared at him, trying to process the implications. "You've been in touch with people here?" "All this time? Not exactly in touch. But I have friends who have friends. I knew you were getting married, knew you were finishing art school. I even saw some of your paintings online. You got really good A's. The childhood nickname hit me like a physical blow. No one had called me A's since he left. Come inside," I said, suddenly aware that we were having this reunion on the front porch where anyone could see. "You're soaked." Ren followed me into the kitchen, looking around with the careful attention of someone revisiting a place they thought they'd never see again. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, same yellow walls, same mismatched chairs around the oak table Dad had built when we were kids. "Coffee?" I asked, needing something to do with my hands. "Please." I poured him a mug and watched him wrap his hands around it like he was trying to absorb its warmth. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion, like someone who'd been carrying a heavy burden for a long time. "Where have you been?" I asked. "Everywhere, nowhere. I spent a couple years in British Columbia working on fishing boats. Then I was in Alaska for a while doing construction. Last year I was in Montana working on a ranch." He took a sip of coffee. "I never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots. Why?" Ren was quiet for a moment, studying his coffee like it might have answers. "Because I was running from this place. From what happened here. From the person I was when I lived in this house." "What had happened, Ren? Mom never told me why you left. She just said you had a fight and decided you needed space." His laugh was bitter. "Is that what she called it? A fight? What would you call it?" Before Ren could answer, we heard the front door open and Mom's voice calling out, "Isolde? I'm home early. I thought we should." She appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped dead when she saw Ren sitting at our table. The color drained from her face, and her hand moved to her collarbone in that unconscious gesture of anxiety. "Hello, Mom," Ren said quietly. Pharrell stood frozen for a long moment, like she was seeing a ghost. Then something shifted in her expression, surprise, giving way to a kind of weary resignation. "Ren, you look well. You look exactly the same." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. I looked back and forth between them, trying to understand the undercurrents of their conversation. "How long are you planning to stay?" Mom asked, setting her purse down with careful precision. "That depends on a few things, such as whether you're finally ready to tell Isolde the truth about why I left." Mom's composure cracked slightly. "Ren, this isn't the time. Actually, I think it's exactly the time." He looked at me, his green eyes serious. "Especially considering what you did to her wedding. You don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly." Ren's voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath it. "I understand that you've been controlling Isolde's life the same way you tried to control mine. The difference is, she didn't fight back. I was protecting her. From what? From making her own choices? From possibly making mistakes?" Ren stood up, and I could see the years of anger he'd been carrying. "From ending up like Dad?" The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Mom went completely still, and I felt like I was watching a conversation in a foreign language, understanding individual words, but missing the crucial meaning. "What about Dad?" I asked. Ren and Mom looked at each other for a long moment, having some kind of silent argument. Finally, Ren turned to me. "Dad had an affair, For the last 3 years of his life, he was having an affair with Evran's mother." The kitchen tilted around me. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself as the implications crashed over me like cold water. "That's impossible," I said. "Dad loved Mom. He did love her," Ren said gently. "But he was also weak and lonely, and Catherine Doyle was there when he needed someone to talk to." I looked at my mother, searching her face for denial, for contradiction, for anything that would make this revelation untrue. Instead, I saw confirmation in the way her shoulders sagged, in the tears she was trying not to shed. "How long have you known?" I whispered. "I found out the week before your father died," she said quietly. A letter fell out of his jacket pocket when I was taking it to the dry cleaner. I confronted him, and he promised to end it. Then he had the heart attack before we could work through it. "And you never told me you were 17, Isolde. You just lost your father. I couldn't bear to destroy your memory of him too." I turned to Ren. "But you knew?" "I figured it out a few months later. I started putting pieces together, Dad's late nights, his mood changes, the way he acted around the Doyles. I confronted Mom about it, and she admitted it. We had a huge fight about whether to tell you. You wanted to tell me? I thought you deserved to know the truth. Mom thought we should protect you from it." His voice was heavy with old pain. "She accused me of wanting to hurt you, of being cruel and selfish. I accused her of treating you like a child who couldn't handle reality. It escalated from there. And that's why you left." Ren nodded. "She basically told me that if I couldn't support her decision to protect you, then maybe I didn't belong in this family. So I left." I stared at my mother, trying to reconcile this information with everything I thought I knew about our family. "You let him leave rather than tell me the truth." "I thought I was doing what was best for you," she said, tears finally spilling over. "You were already devastated by your father's death. I couldn't bear to make it worse. So instead you let me grow up believing in a fantasy. You let me plan a wedding to the son of the woman who had an affair with my father. You let me build my entire understanding of love and marriage on a lie. I never intended for you to get engaged to Evran. When that started happening, I tried to discourage it subtly, but you seemed so happy, So you waited until 2 years of planning and 3 weeks before the wedding to blow up my life. I panicked, Mom admitted. I kept thinking I'd find a way to stop it without having to tell you everything, but time was running out. When I realized you were really going to marry him, I couldn't let that happen. The pieces were finally falling into place, but the picture they created was uglier than I'd imagined. Does Evran know about our fathers? I don't know, Mom said. Catherine and I never spoke about it after your father died. It's possible she never told our family. But it's also possible that Evran has known all along that our families have this history. The thought made me sick. Had our entire relationship been built on a foundation of secrets and lies? Had everyone been protecting me from truths I had a right to know? I need air, I said, standing up so quickly that my chair scraped against the floor. Isolde, please? Mom started. No, I need to think. I need to be alone. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, leaving my mother and brother to their reunion. As I stepped onto the porch, I could hear them starting to argue behind me, their voices rising with 5 years of unresolved anger and pain. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy with moisture and the promise of more storms to come. I walked without direction, letting my feet carry me along familiar paths while my mind struggled to process what I'd just learned about my father, my kind, gentle father who had read me bedtime stories and taught me to skip stones, had been living a double life. The marriage I'd held up as my ideal had been broken long before he died. And my mother had been carrying this knowledge alone for 5 years, letting it shape every decision she made about my life. I found myself at the cemetery where Dad was, buried, standing in front of his headstone with its simple inscription, "Beloved husband and father." The words felt different now, loaded with irony and complexity I'd never noticed before. Did you love her? I asked the headstone. Or were you just running away from us? The stone offered no answers, just the same granite silence it had maintained for 5 years. My phone buzzed with a text from Evran. I heard Ren is back in town. Are you okay? I stared at the message, wondering how he'd already heard about my brother's return. Small towns, like Ren had said, word traveled fast, especially when it concerned the Merrin family drama that everyone probably remembered but no one had ever discussed in front of me. I deleted the text without responding and called Sorrel instead. Please tell me you have more wine, I said when she answered. Always. What happened now? My brother came home, and I found out my father was having an affair with my fiance's mother when he died. There was a pause. I'll open the good bottle. Sorrel's apartment had become my refuge, the one place where I could process the increasingly surreal developments in my life without worrying about managing anyone else's emotions. She listened to my account of the morning's revelations while making her excellent stress relief grilled cheese sandwiches, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just letting me talk. So let me make sure I have this straight, she said when I finished. Your dad was having an affair with Evran's. Mom, your mom has known about this for 5 years. Your brother left home because your mom wouldn't let him tell you the truth. And your mom canceled your wedding partly because she couldn't bear the idea of you marrying into the family that was involved in your father's betrayal. That's the general outline, yes. And Evran may or may not know about any of this. Correct. Sorrel handed me a sandwich and sat down across from me. Honey, your family could have their own soap opera. It gets worse, I said, taking a bite of the sandwich and realizing I hadn't eaten anything since last night's Thai food. I keep thinking about all the times my mom made subtle comments about Evran, all the ways she tried to steer me away from him without actually saying why. She's been manipulating my choices for years, and I never noticed. Manipulation disguised as protection is still manipulation, Sorrel said, even if her motives were loving. Were they loving, though? Or were they selfish? Was she protecting? Me from pain, or was she protecting herself from having to deal with the complicated reality of our family's history? Probably both. People rarely have pure motives for anything. I thought about my conversation with Ren, the pain in his eyes when he talked about leaving home. She let my brother disappear from our lives rather than admit she might be wrong about something that doesn't feel very loving. It feels controlling. Everything feels controlling now. Every choice I've made, every path I've taken, how much of it was really mine, and how much of it was the result of her subtle influence. Sorrel studied my face. What's the worst part? The lies or the realization that you might not know yourself as well as you thought. The question hit me like a physical blow because it was so accurate. Both. I feel like I've been living in a house of mirrors where nothing is what it appears to be. So what are you going to do about it? I don't know. Burn everything down and start over? That's one option. What are the others? I considered this seriously. I could try to have conversations with everyone, Mom, Evran, even Catherine Doyle, if I can work up the courage. I could try to untangle what's true from what's been hidden or distorted. That sounds exhausting, but probably necessary. Or I could run away and never come back like Ren did. How did that work out for him? I thought about my brother's weathered hands and tired eyes, the way he'd look like someone who'd been carrying a heavy burden for too long. Not great, I think. Running away is just another form of letting other people's choices control your life, Sorrel said gently. It's letting their mistakes define your future. So what's the alternative? The alternative is doing the hard work of figuring out who you are independent of all this family drama. The alternative is making choices based on what you want, not on what you're running from or what you're trying to prove. I finished my sandwich and curled up in the corner of her couch, pulling a throw pillow against my chest. I don't even know what I want anymore. I thought I wanted to marry Evran and live in Millfield and maybe teach art at the local high school. But was that really what I wanted, or was that just the safest, most acceptable choice? What did you want when you were a kid? Before you learned to worry about what other people expected. I closed my eyes and tried to remember myself at 8 or 9 before my father died and everything got complicated. I wanted to travel. I wanted to see art in museums around the world. I wanted to live in a city where no one knew my name. I could be anyone I chose to be. And what happened to those dreams? Life happened. Dad died, and Mom needed me to be close. Everyone was here, and he was safe and familiar. It was easier to choose the known quantity than to risk disappointment. Or failure. Or success, Sorrel pointed out. Sometimes we're more afraid of succeeding than we are of failing. The thought struck me as unexpectedly true. Had I been afraid of my own potential? Had I chosen the smaller life because it felt manageable? My phone rang, interrupting my introspection. Ren. Hey, I said, answering on the second ring. Hey, are you okay? You left pretty abruptly. I needed space to process. Are you and Mom speaking in complete sentences yet? Or making progress? She looks so tired. Like she's been carrying this weight for years and it's finally crushing her. I felt a pang of sympathy despite my anger. What did you two talk about? Everything. The affair, why I left, why she made the choices she made. She's not the villain I've been painting her as in my head for 5 years, but she's not the victim either. She's just a person who made some really questionable decisions out of fear and pain. Does that excuse what she did? No, but it explains it, and maybe that's a place to start. I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, the emotional toll of the morning's revelations. Where are you staying? Couch at Mom's for now, if she have me. I know it's weird, but I want to try to repair some of the damage before I leave again. You're leaving again. Eventually. I have a job waiting for me in Colorado and a life that doesn't include Millfield. But I want to make sure you're okay first. The protectiveness in his voice reminded me of when we were kids, when he'd walk me to school and make sure no one picked on me. It had been 5 years since I'd had a big brother, and I'd forgotten how much I'd missed it. I'm okay, I said. Or I will be, I think. Have you talked to Evran yet? No, I'm not ready for that conversation. Fair enough, but is? You should know that whatever else he might be hiding, I don't think he's anything like Dad. I think he genuinely loves you, even if he doesn't know how to handle that love. How can you possibly know that? Because I've been watching from a distance for 5 years, and the way he looks at you, it's not fake. Whatever his faults are, his feelings for you are real. The words should have been comforting, but they just made everything more complicated. If Evran really loved me, why had he been having doubts about marriage? And how could I trust my own feelings when they'd been shaped by so many lies and omissions? I have to go, I said. But Ren, I'm glad you're home. Me too. Little sister, me too. After I hung up, Sorrel and I sat in comfortable silence for a while. The afternoon light was shifting, casting long shadows across her apartment, and I could hear the sounds of normal life continuing outside, people going about their daily routines, unaware that my entire understanding of reality had been reorganized in the space of 24 hours. Can I ask you something? I said finally. Always. When you left New York and came here, how did you know you were making the right choice? How did you trust yourself to build something new when your old life had fallen apart? Sorrel considered the question seriously. I didn't know it was the right choice. I just knew it was my choice. For the first time in years, I was making a decision based on what I needed rather than what other people expected from me. And that was enough. It was a start. And sometimes a start is all you need. I thought about this as the shadows grew. Longer and the day moved toward evening. Somewhere in town, my mother and brother were trying to rebuild a relationship that had been shattered by secrets and misunderstandings. Somewhere else, Evran was probably wondering why I wasn't returning. His calls! And somewhere beyond the borders of Millfield, there was a whole world of possibilities I'd never seriously considered. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time in my life, I was completely free to choose what came next. The wedding was canceled, the future I planned was no longer an option, and everyone's expectations had been reset to 0. It was terrifying. It was also exhilarating. I think, I said slowly, I need to have some difficult conversations. With whom? With everyone. Starting with Evran, Sorrel nodded approvingly. And then I think I need to figure out what my life looks like when I'm not trying to be the person everyone else needs me to be. That sounds like a good plan. It sounds like the hardest thing I've ever tried to do. The best things usually are. I called Evran that evening and asked him to meet me at the beach near his boathouse. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that reflected off the calm water of the harbor. It would have been romantic under different circumstances, but tonight it felt more like the setting for a funeral, the death of the relationship we thought we had. Evran was already there when I arrived, sitting on a piece of driftwood and skipping stones across the water with the absent precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. He looked up when he heard my footsteps on the rocky beach, and I could see the anxiety in his face. Thank you for agreeing to see me, he said as I approached. We need to talk about some things. I know I've been thinking about what I said yesterday, and I handled it terribly. I should have been honest with you months ago about my doubts, instead of letting it build up until Evran. I interrupted. Did you know about our fathers? The question hung between us like a bridge. I wasn't sure either of us wanted to cross. I watched his face carefully, looking for signs of recognition or surprise. His confusion seemed genuine. What about our fathers? Did you know that my father was having an affair with your mother before he died? The color drained from his face. He stopped mid-motion with a stone in his hand, staring at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. What? For the last 3 years of his life, my father was having an affair with your mother? My mom found out the week before he died. That's why she canceled our wedding. She couldn't bear the idea of me marrying into your family. Evran dropped the stone and stood up, pacing to the water's edge and back. That's impossible. My mother would never... Your father was married to Varel. He loved her. People are complicated, Evran. Love doesn't make someone incapable of betrayal. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from every time he was stressed or overwhelmed. How long have you known? Since this morning. My brother came home and told me. Ren's back? Yes, he left 5 years ago because he thought I deserved to know the truth, and my mother chose protecting me from painful reality over keeping her son at home. Evran sat down heavily on the driftwood, his head in his hands. I had no idea. I swear to you, Isolde, I had no idea. Your mother never said anything? Never acted strangely around my family? God, there were things that make sense now. She was always weird about your dad's death, more affected by it than I understood. And she never liked the idea of us getting serious. I thought it was just because she didn't want me to get tied down young, but maybe she knew that our getting together would eventually force this truth into the open. We sat in silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. The harbor looked peaceful in the gathering dusk, boat masts swaying gently in the evening breeze. It was hard to believe that this serene setting had been the backdrop for so much deception and pain. I need to ask you something, I said finally, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay, when you said you weren't ready to get married, was that really about your feelings for me? Or was it about something else? Evran was quiet for a long time, long enough that I started to wonder if he was going to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the sound of water lapping against the shore. I love you, Isolde. I've loved you since we were kids. But I've also felt like I was living up to an expectation rather than making a choice. What do you mean? I mean that everyone always assumed we'd end up together. Your mom, my parents, people in town, they all treated it like it was inevitable. And maybe because of that, I never really examined whether it was what I actually wanted or just what seemed like the natural progression of our friendship. His honesty hit me like cold water, but it was the kind of cold that woke you up rather than numbed you. So you were going along with what other people expected too. I think so. And I think part of me has been panicking about that for months, but I didn't know how to talk about it without hurting you. So when my mother canceled the wedding, part of you felt relieved because it took the decision away from both of us. Yes, he admitted, and I hate myself for feeling that way. I looked at this man I thought I knew completely, my childhood friend, my first love, my almost husband, and realized we'd both been sleepwalking through relationship based more on habit and expectation than on conscious choice. Can I tell you something? I said. Of course. I think I felt the same way. I was so focused on planning the perfect wedding that I stopped thinking about whether I actually wanted the marriage it was supposed to represent. Really? Really. I love the idea of us, the story of childhood sweethearts who grew up in God, married and lived happily ever after. But I'm not sure I was in love with the reality of what our life together would actually look like. The admission felt both liberating and terrifying. For 2 years, I'd been telling myself I was preparing for my dream wedding, but maybe what I'd really been doing was avoiding the hard work of figuring out what I actually wanted from life. So where does that leave us? Evran asked. I don't know. I think we both need time to figure out who we are when we're not trying to be the people everyone expects us to be. Are you saying we should break up? The question hung between us like a challenge. I thought about all the possible answers. We could try counseling. We could postpone the wedding and work on our relationship. We could pretend none of this had happened and proceed with the original plan. But all of those options involved continuing to build on a foundation that we now knew was cracked. I think, I said carefully, that we should take a break. A real break where we're not in contact and we're not trying to fix this or figure it out together. I think we both need space to grow into ourselves before we can know if we're right. For each other. Evran nodded slowly, and I could see the relief in his face even as tears started to form in his eyes. How long? I don't know, months, maybe longer. And then we see if we still want the same things. If we still want each other. We walked back toward our cars together. The comfortable silence of people who'd known each other for 15 years. At my car, Evran pulled me into a hug that felt like goodbye. I'm sorry, he whispered into my hair, for not being braver sooner. For letting us both drift into something we weren't sure about. I'm sorry too, I said, for not asking the hard questions before we got this far. Will you be okay? I think so, will you? Eventually. I drove home slowly, taking the long way around the harbor to give myself time to process what had just happened. I'd essentially ended my engagement, dissolved a relationship that had defined much of my adult life, and somehow I felt lighter rather than devastated. The house was quiet when I got home. With lights on in the kitchen and living room, I found Ren and my mother sitting at the kitchen table with cups of tea, looking like they'd been having a serious conversation. How did it go? Ren asked when I walked in. We broke up, I said, surprised by how matter-of-fact I sounded. Mom looked stricken. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I never wanted. It's okay, Mom. It was the right thing to do. We both needed to admit that we weren't ready for marriage. Maybe weren't right for each other in the way we thought we were. Are you sure you're okay? Ren asked, studying my face with concern. I'm sure. It was sad, but it was also a relief. Like finally admitting a truth we'd both been avoiding. I sat down at the table with them, noting how strange it felt to have our family of 3 gathered in the same room again. The last time we'd all been together like this, I'd been 17 and Dad had still been alive, and none of us had known about the secrets that would eventually tear us apart. We've been talking, Mom said carefully, about the past, about the mistakes we've all made, about how to move forward. And Ren leaned forward, his hands wrapped around his tea mug. I want to try to rebuild our relationship, but I need you to understand that I'm not the same person who left here 5 years ago. I can't just slip back into being your son who follows your rules and doesn't ask difficult questions. Mom nodded. I understand, and I need both of you to know that I'm sorry. For the secrets, for the manipulation, for thinking I could protect you from painful truths by controlling your choices. It's going to take time, I said, to rebuild trust, to figure out how to be a family again. I know, she said, but I want to try if you'll let me. We talked until late that night, sharing stories and feelings that had been buried for years. Ren told us about his travels, the jobs he'd worked, the ways he tried to outrun the pain of leaving home. Mom talked about the loneliness of the past 5 years, the way the secrets had eaten at her until she felt like she was disappearing. And I talked about the life I'd been building without really examining whether it was the life I wanted, the way I'd chosen safety and familiarity over growth and possibility. So what happens now? Ren asked as we were getting ready for bed. Now, I said, I figure out what I actually want from my life. For the first time, I'm completely free to choose my own path. Any idea what that might look like? I thought about my conversation with Sorrel about the dreams I'd had as a child before I learned to be practical and cautious. Maybe travel. Maybe art school in a city where no one knows my story. Maybe something I haven't even thought of yet. That sounds terrifying, Mom said. It is, I agreed. But it's also exciting. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm waking up. The next few weeks passed in a strange suspension of time. With no wedding to plan and no immediate future to prepare for, I found myself living in the present moment in a way I hadn't done in years. I spent my days painting, taking long walks along the coastal paths, and having conversations with my family that slowly began to heal old wounds. Ren stayed for 2 weeks, helping Mom with some repairs around the house and gradually rebuilding their relationship. It wasn't easy. There were arguments and tears and moments when it seemed like the damage was too deep to repair. But there was also laughter and shared meals and quiet moments of understanding that felt like tiny miracles. You know what the weirdest part is? I said to him one evening as we sat on the front porch watching the sunset, I'm not angry anymore. About what specifically? Because there's been a lot to be angry about any of it. The canceled wedding, the lies, even Dad's affair. I'm sad about some of it and disappointed, but the anger just dissolved. Ren studied my face in the fading light. Why do you think that is? Because I realized that holding on to anger was just another way of letting other people's choices control my life, and I'm done with that. What are you going to do instead? I'm going to apply to graduate school. Maybe in New York, maybe in California. Somewhere far enough away that I have to figure out who I am without everyone else's history weighing me down. That sounds like running away. Maybe it sounds like running towards something. Ren left on a Wednesday morning driving, away in his beat-up truck with promises to stay in touch and visit again soon. Watching him go was sad, but it wasn't devastating the way it had been when he left the first time. Now it felt like a natural part of the process of rebuilding our family. He needed to continue his own journey, but the door was open for him to come home whenever he was ready. Mom and I were alone again, but the dynamic between us had shifted fundamentally. She was trying hard not to offer unsolicited advice or make decisions for me, and I was trying to include her in my thoughts and plans without letting her fears influence my choices. I found this in your father's desk, she said one evening, handing me an envelope with my name written on it in Dad's handwriting. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a short letter dated just a week before he died. My dearest Isolde, it read, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're probably trying to make sense of some difficult truths about your old dad. I want you to know that whatever mistakes I made, whatever pain I caused, my love for you was always pure and uncomplicated. You have a gift for seeing beauty in the world, and I hope you never lose that. Don't let other people's failures make you afraid to trust your own heart. Love, Dad. I cried reading it, but they were clean tears, the kind that wash away old pain rather than creating new wounds. He knew, I said to Mom when I could speak again. He knew he was dying. He knew about the affair. He knew it would come out eventually. He wanted me to know that whatever else happened, he loved me. Mom was crying too. I found that letter when I was going through his things after the funeral. I've been carrying it around for 5 years, trying to decide whether to give it to you. What changed your mind? I realized that he was right. I was so afraid of his mistakes hurting you that I forgot you had the right to make your own choices about how to process them. That night, I called Sorrel and told her about my graduate school plans. Where are you thinking of applying? She asked. RIC maybe, or the Art Institute in San Francisco. Somewhere with a good illustration program and a completely different environment from here. That sounds perfect. When would you start? Fall semester, if I can get my applications together in time. It's late in the process, but some schools have rolling admissions. Need help with your portfolio? Actually, yes. I want to put together something that shows who I am as an artist, not just what I think admissions committees want to see. We spent the next week working on my portfolio, selecting pieces that told a story about my artistic evolution and my connection to place and memory. The final collection included landscapes of Millfield, but also some experimental pieces I'd done. In college, that pushed beyond traditional illustration into more abstract territory. This is really strong work, Sorrel said as we laid out the final selections. You have a unique voice, and you're not afraid to take risks with your art. I'm learning not to be afraid to take risks in general. How does it feel? Terrifying and exhilarating. Like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you can fly. I submitted applications to 6 different programs, each one representing a different vision of what my future might look like. Then I waited, spending the time continuing to rebuild my relationship with my mother and figuring out what I wanted my life to look like in the short term. Evran and I had maintained our agreement about no contact, but I heard through mutual friends that he was doing well. He'd taken a job teaching sailing at a camp in Vermont for the summer, giving himself the same kind of space and distance I was trying to create. Do you miss him? Mom asked one day as we were working in the garden. Together, I miss our friendship, I said honestly. I miss having someone who knew me so well. But I don't miss the relationship we had, if that makes sense. It does. Sometimes loving someone means letting them go to find themselves. Is that what you wish you'd done with Ren? Yes. I wish I'd been brave enough to trust that he could handle the truth, even if it was painful. I wish I'd believed in his strength instead of trying to protect him from reality. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, our hands in the rich Maine soil, tending to plants that would bloom and fade and bloom again according to their own natural rhythms. 3 weeks later, I got an acceptance letter from the Rhode Island School of Design. Full scholarship, based on the strength of my portfolio and a personal essay about art as a tool for processing family trauma and personal transformation. I got in, I told Mom, holding the letter with hands that shook with excitement and terror. Oh, honey, that's wonderful. She hugged me tightly, and I could feel her trying not to cry. I'm so proud of you. Are you okay with this? With me leaving? I'm terrified, she admitted, but I'm also excited for you. This is what you need to do. It's only Rhode Island. I can come home on weekends sometimes. I know. And I'll be here when you do. That evening, I called Ren to share the news. RISD is amazing, he said. I'm so proud of you for taking this leap. It feels huge. It is huge. But you're ready for it. How can you be so sure? Because you're not running away from anything anymore. You're running towards something. That makes all the difference. I spent the summer preparing to leave Millfield not forever, but for long. Enough to figure out who I was beyond the boundaries of my childhood. I sold my car and bought a train ticket to Providence. I packed my art supplies and my favorite books and one photo of my family from before everything got complicated. Night before I left, I walked to the lighthouse where Evran and I had our final conversation as a couple. The light was automated now, sweeping across the dark water in steady, reliable intervals. I sat on the rocks and watched it turn, thinking about all the ships it had guided safely to shore over the years. Some journeys ended at the lighthouse. I realized, but some journeys began there too. The next morning, Mom drove me to the train station in Portland. We didn't talk much during the drive. There was too much to say and no adequate words to say it. "Call me when you get there," she said as I shouldered my bags. "I will." "And Isolde?" "Yeah, trust yourself. You have good instincts when you listen to them." I boarded the train with my portfolio under my arm and my father's letter in my pocket, ready to begin the next chapter of a story that was finally completely my own. The train pulled into Providence on a September morning that felt like possibility itself. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the city looked vibrant and alive in a way that made my heart race with anticipation. For the first time in my life, I was somewhere that had no history with my family. No expectations based on who I used to be or who people thought I should become. My apartment was a tiny studio in a converted warehouse near the campus, with exposed brick walls and enormous windows that let in streams of golden morning light. It was nothing like the spacious rooms of my childhood home, but it felt like freedom in physical form, a space that was entirely mine to shape according to my own vision. The first few weeks were overwhelming in the best possible way. My classes pushed me to think about art and storytelling in ways I'd never considered, and my professors treated me like a serious artist rather than a talented student. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who understood that making art wasn't just a hobby or a career path. It was a way of processing the world, of making sense of experiences that couldn't be captured in ordinary language. "Your work has a haunting quality," Professor Martinez said after reviewing my first project, a series of watercolor illustrations exploring the concept of home. "There's a sense of loss in these pieces, but also resilience, like someone who's learned that beautiful things can grow from broken ground." I thought about that observation as I worked late into the evening in the studio space I'd been assigned, surrounded by the creative energy of other students wrestling with their own artistic visions. The building hummed with productive intensity, and I felt more at home in those paint-splattered rooms than I had anywhere in years. I called Mom every Sunday, as promised, and our conversations gradually shifted from our checking on my well-being to genuine exchanges about our respective lives. She'd started taking a pottery class and volunteering at an animal shelter, filling her days with activities that brought her joy rather than just keeping her busy. "I never realized how much of my identity was tied up in being your mother," she admitted during one of our calls. "Don't get me wrong, being your mother is one of the best things about my life, but I'd forgotten how to be Varel, just Varel." "How does it feel being just Varel? Lonely sometimes, but also liberating. I'm remembering things about myself that I lost along the way." Ren called every few weeks from Colorado, where he'd taken a job building custom furniture for a high-end design company. He sounded happier than he had in years, like someone who finally found a way to use his restless energy constructively. "You sound different," he said during one of our conversations. "More settled in yourself. I feel different. Like I'm finally living in my own skin instead of trying to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be." That's exactly how I felt when I first left home. Scary and exhilarating at the same time. Do you think you'll ever come back? To live, I mean? Maybe someday. But not until I'm sure I'm coming back because I want to, not because I feel obligated. To I understood exactly what he meant. Distance had given me perspective on Millfield that I never could have gained while living there. I could appreciate its beauty and the genuine love of the people there without feeling trapped by their expectations. As the semester progressed, I found myself taking risks with my work that I never would have attempted before. I experimented with different mediums, explored themes that felt personally challenging, and pushed myself to be vulnerable in ways that translated into more powerful art. My thesis project, which I'd been developing throughout the fall semester, was a graphic novel about a young woman uncovering family secrets and learning to trust her own judgment. It was autobiographical without being literal, using the metaphor of a coastal town slowly being revealed by receding fog. "This is exceptional work," Professor Chun said when I showed her the preliminary pages. "You're not just illustrating a story, you're using visual narrative to explore complex themes about identity, family, and personal autonomy." "It feels like the most honest thing I've ever created," I said. "The best art usually does." December brought the first serious snow of the season and acceptance letters for next year's program. I'd been accepted to continue for my MFA with a teaching assistantship that would help cover expenses. For the first time since high school, I was making plans more than a few months in advance, building toward a future that felt both ambitious and achievable. I went home for Christmas, taking the train through a landscape transformed by snow into something that looked like a fairy tale. The familiar sights of coastal Maine looked smaller somehow, contained in a way that felt comforting rather than limiting. The house was decorated for the holidays with Mom's characteristic attention to beautiful details, but there was a warmth to it that hadn't been there in previous years. She'd invited Sorrel for Christmas dinner, and the three of us spent the evening cooking together and sharing stories about our respective adventures. "You look different," Sorrel said as we were cleaning up after dinner. "More confident. Like, you've grown into yourself." "I feel like I have. It's amazing what happens when you stop trying to be the person everyone else needs you to be." "Any regrets?" I thought about it seriously. "About leaving?" "No. About the way things ended with Evran? Sometimes. I wonder if we could have figured out differently if we'd been braver earlier." "Have you heard from him?" "A Christmas card." "He's doing well, working for a sailing school in the Caribbean." "He sounds happy." "And how do you feel about that?" "Happy for him, and grateful that we both had the courage to let go of something that wasn't right, even when it would have been easier to hold on." On Christmas Eve, Mom and I took a walk along the coastal path, our footsteps crunching in the snow as we followed. The familiar route past the lighthouse and around the harbor. The water was steel gray under the winter sky, and the boats in the harbor looked like they were resting until spring called them back to life. "I have something for you," Mom said. When we reached the lighthouse, she pulled a small wrapped package from her coat pocket. Inside was a key old brass, worn smooth by years of handling. "It's the key to your grandmother's cottage," she said. "The one she left me that I never knew what to do with." Grandma Rose's cottage sat on 10 acres about an hour inland, a small farmhouse with an art studio that my grandmother had built in her retirement years. I always loved visiting there as a child, but after she died, Mom had never seemed to know what to do with the property. "I thought maybe you could use it as a retreat," Mom continued. "Somewhere to work on your art when you need space and quiet. It's yours now to do with whatever feels right." I turned the key over in my hand, feeling the weight of the gift, not just the property, but the trust it represented. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Your grandmother would have loved knowing it was being used by another artist in the family." "Thank you. This is ... This is perfect." We stood together in the snow, looking out at the water that had shaped both our lives in different ways. I thought about all the changes the past year had brought, all the ways we both learned to let go of, old patterns and trust in new possibilities. I'm proud of you, Mom said quietly, for having the courage to leave, for choosing to grow instead of staying safe. I learned it from you, I said, eventually. When I returned to school in January, I threw myself into my work with renewed energy. The graphic novel was taking shape into something I was genuinely proud of, and I'd started getting interest from publishers who specialized in illustrated memoirs. Professor Martinez encouraged me to submit the work to several competitions. And by spring, I'd won a student award that came with both recognition and a small cash prize. More importantly, it validated my decision to trust my own artistic instincts and tell the stories that felt most urgent to me. What's next? She asked as we reviewed my portfolio for my final critique of the year. I want to keep developing this style of visual storytelling. Maybe create a series of graphic novels about women who have to choose between security and authenticity. That's a powerful theme, and timely. I think a lot of people, especially women, get trapped in lives that look good from the outside, but don't actually fit who they are inside. I want to explore what it takes to break out of that. Sounds like you're planning to change the world, one story at a time. Maybe just one person at a time, starting with myself. As my first year at Rist drew to a close, I realized I was happier than I'd ever been. Not because my life was perfect or because everything had worked out exactly as planned, but because I was finally living authentically, making choices based on my own values and desires rather than other people's expectations. I spent the summer at Grandma Rose's cottage, fixing it up and establishing a studio space where I could work on my next project. The isolation was exactly what I needed: time to think and create without distractions. Surrounded by the natural beauty that had always inspired my best work, Mom visited regularly, bringing groceries and staying for dinners that stretched long into the evening. Our relationship had evolved into something that felt more like friendship between equals, rather than the complicated dynamic of mother and dependent daughter. Ren came for a week in August, helping me repair the cottage's front porch and sharing stories about his work in Colorado. He seemed settled in a way I'd never seen before, like someone who'd finally found his place in the world. "Do you think you'll stay in Rhode Island after you finish your MFA?" he asked one evening as we sat on the newly repaired porch watching fireflies dance in the tall grass. "I don't know. Maybe I'll split my time between there and here. Have a base in the city, but come back here when I need space to think and create." That sounds like a good balance. What about you? Any thoughts about coming back to Maine? Maybe someday, but not yet. I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not defined by the family drama I left behind. I understand that completely. We said in comfortable silence, two siblings who'd found their way back to each other after years of separation and misunderstanding. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led us to a place of genuine connection, built on choice rather than obligation. As summer faded into autumn and I prepared to return to school for my second year, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this point. The canceled wedding had felt like the end of the world when it happened, but it had actually been the beginning of a life that was authentically mine. I packed my bags for the return to Providence with excitement, rather than anxiety, knowing I was returning to a place where I could continue growing into the person I was meant to be. And for the first time in my life, I had complete confidence that wherever the path led next, I had the courage and wisdom to walk it on my own terms. The train pulled away from the Portland station on a crisp September morning, carrying me toward another year of learning and growth and artistic discovery. As I watched the Maine coastline disappear behind me, I felt nothing but gratitude for the beautiful, complicated journey that had brought me to this moment of perfect possibility. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting. For you, just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.